Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Everyday Rockstars. I'm your host, Andy Vigu, and today I've got a very, very special guest, someone I've known my entire life, my oldest sister, Rachel Hyde. Welcome, Rachel.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy.
I'm very excited to have you here today. Obviously, we stay in touch, and as you and I, as we talked about in our monthly Zoom call on Sunday, um, not everybody talks that often with their siblings.
It's true. I hear that a lot. Like, wow, you're impressively connected to your siblings, even though you're far away.
It is funny because I guess I just don't even ask people if they have a group text with their siblings and that they somebody comments on daily and at times many times in a day, much less the Zoom call is a new thing this year that I don't want to say that I'm glad about anything with COVID, but I'm glad that we learned some things from it and we're able to take a few positives like more video communication and more Zoom calls and things like that. So I know we made the goal at the beginning of the year as the five of us siblings to have one of those every month, and I think it's been a great way to stay in touch.
I agree. Thank you for spearheading that.
Yeah, it doesn't seem you're welcome, but it doesn't seem so weird to see you on my laptop.
Right.
So without further ado, we you and I talked a little bit ahead of time that I was going uh, to give you some questions and things that interested me. Um, in whatever form that you're most comfortable, I want you to kind of talk to us a little bit about how mental health issues have affected your family, and maybe the things that you and your family have learned from them.
Well, I think going back even before the family that I created, um, when I was 11, and just be prefaced with, I think you'd agree, we had a very happy childhood. Our home was very secure, good friends. Um, and that's important because when I was 11, I remember really clearly swimming in Grandmom and Pop-Pop's pool, middle of the summer, really hot. And then all of a sudden, the world shifted. Everything changed for me. And you know that feeling of deja vu when you're like, oh, yes, I feel like this has happened before. Well, I
Yeah,
had the opposite of that, where all of a sudden I didn't know where I was or who I was or what was going on, even though this was a very familiar spot. Kids were splashing and playing. And I turned to our mom and tried to articulate what had happened or asked her, and she had no idea. And it's something that would just happen to me periodically. Seemed to happen a little more in the summer, but I went to neurologists and, they ran tests to see if I was having seizures. Nobody could give us an answer. And so it was just one of these weird things that happened. And then fast forward to, I had two little kids and was driving on the Atlantic City Expressway one day. The girls were with mom and dad, and it was in their car, and there was no air conditioning. And it was 100 degrees, and I passed out or fell asleep and came to in the middle of the road. Go back on the road and expect to be fully hit, the expressway. It was amazing I
yeah.
didn't hit a tree. Most of that is treed. And all the cars were able to stop. I was okay, but something was triggered in me. And so I had that feeling almost continually, and especially when I was driving on roads and I felt like I was going crazy. Again, saw a neurologist and couldn't figure out until I went to a counselor, and he opens up, at the time it was the DSM-3R, and read a description of depersonalization, derealization, a dissociative disorder. And I just cried because this was the answer of what I'd been struggling with. Before it wasn't so much a struggle, it was just this weird thing that would happen. But at that point, it had turned to, I would say, a mental illness because it was really impeding my ability to even function. So that's a mental health challenge that I've had most of my life that a lot of the people even closest to me don't even really know about or are aware that that's something I deal with a lot. And of course, I'm my 50s now. I know how to deal with it. It's not freaking me out. I'm not going crazy, but it does still happen a lot, where I kind of lose my sense of self or feel like something's very dreamlike, or my body can feel very different outside me. It doesn't feel like it's mine. For years, I had trouble looking in the mirror. And honestly, looking back at the pictures, you can tell that period because I didn't look very good then. But it's so that's my own struggle. It's been very much a part of my life. But then my
And how old were
family now,
you? How old were you when that first happened? I know you mentioned Grandma and Pop, and they moved out
11.
of that house. I mean, forever ago.
Yeah, I was 11.
11. And so
Yeah.
between 11 and the time you had two kids, right? I mean, there's a good 20, not 20 years, but 15 plus years
Yep.
there. Um, what? How often was this affecting you?
Kind of like deja vu. It would just happen, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm having another episode," and like my husband knew about it, and I just would have that weird feeling that I didn't know where I was or who I was or what I was doing, and it's very brief. It kind of felt like your computer restarting. Um, but it was something I dealt with, but I had trouble telling people what because it doesn't sound like anything.
Yeah.
And the reason I said it's important we had a happy childhood is this is often associated with PTSD. And so people who
Oh,
have heard from PTSD often know what I'm talking about, and that kind of dissociating, especially when something's a trigger. But it wasn't for me. It wasn't out of trauma, and it wasn't out of drug use. That's the other thing is often it's triggered by drug use. I've been in a lot of depersonalization boards when I was looking for a community that would understand, and a lot of people it's triggered by their first drug use, and often doesn't go away.
so how
So
rare is it to have this form that you have, which is not triggered by PTSD or drug use or possibly something else related to that?
there's not good numbers on it. I went to Mount Sinai in New York City once to participate in a study and talk to researchers about it, and they weren't able to tell me much.
Hmm.
And because it's not usually treated with medication, I've not found medications to be helpful, and there's not really specific medications for dissociative disorders. Um, one of my a very sad day was when my 8-year-old described it to me because I'd never talked to my kids about it. And one of my kids, and they were about 8, described this feeling of, I feel like I'm in a dream. I feel like I'm detached. I don't know what's happening. I don't know who I am. I can't look in the mirror. All these things. And to hear that from my own child was just heartbreaking, but also in a way like, hey, I know what you're going through. I've been there, and
Yeah.
so a couple of our kids do have the dissociative disorder, and I like to think it's at least helped them knowing that they weren't alone and that they could talk to
Yeah.
me.
That's got to be tough when you recognize this in yourself. You know the struggles you went through for since the last 40 years, really. That you hear this in your own child, your flesh and blood, the people you love and prize the most. But I imagine you also had a glimmer of hope. Hey, I didn't have someone there who could guide me. I didn't have someone. No one understood me. You go to mom, you went to everybody else, and they just no familiarity, no background. So that had to at least be comforting to you to say, at least I can be there for my child.
Yes, yes, and that was, and I think growing up, it wasn't as stressful for me as it became later. Like another time when I lost one of the kids on the beach. And that panic set in, I think it was even a 4th of July weekend. It was crazy. And then all of a sudden, my 3-year-old was gone. And that panic, I think is normal for anybody. But even after we found him 10 blocks down the beach, I was tripped, as I say, and I was tripped for months that it didn't really go away. And so that's under high stress situations, I feel like my adrenaline goes up and it doesn't come down. But I function, it's there's part of my experience.
Well, now you've found ways to cope with it. Um,
Yeah.
Now that's in your own personal life. Obviously, we've talked offline on a number of other mental health issues and how they've affected either you indirectly through your family and through family members. If there's any of those things that you're comfortable sharing or discussing, I'd love to hear just even maybe a painting with broad strokes as to here's some of the things we've dealt with and here's what I've learned from it and here's what my family, how we've grown through it.
So I do have my husband's permission, Chris, to share that he has had pretty significant mental health struggles throughout his life, throughout our marriage, and times when he was deeply depressed and very low functioning because of the depression and bipolar um, symptoms have been tough, and finding the right therapist and medications. And so mental health has been really in the forefront of what we've had to deal with as a family, and some of our kids and extended family having issues, at times very serious. Even friends, I've been at the ER more times than I care to count with friends and family members who are suicidal, um, who are having breaks. And for one thing, it's taught me is never judge. You have no idea what people are going through, because the mental health issues, you so often can't see someone's anxiety or depression or, you know, manias or psychosis, whatever it is they're going through. Um, I've also learned to very much, I'm pretty good at reacting in a crisis. And even the dissociative disorder, I think, actually helps with that, because I can sometimes just focus, and see, I don't even know if other people have this. I have very two clear voices in my head. That one of them, it may be screaming that they have no idea what's going on, but then there's this other one that's on autopilot. It's like, we got this. So like when I have an episode and I trip driving down the street, there's part of my brain that has no idea what I'm doing, but then I've learned to trust the part that goes, we got this, we can. And that has come into play as I have 6 kids and had them all without epidurals, and there was this dissociative part that helped me sort of focus through. And so, I mean, sometimes I think we can use those things that are obstacles for us and difficult, and find a way for them to be a strength. Or, I mean, maybe it is just having empathy with other people who are going through something similar, or going through their own hard time, that you can just be there for them.
And so, how do you feel about where you're at right now when it comes to these mental health stresses in your life? Do you feel like at this point you can probably handle pretty much anything coming your way because you've been through so much, or do you feel like it's always tenuous? Right? It's like one of these.
I never
Here we
say
go
bring it
again.
on. I mean, I did at one point in my life, like,
Is that all you
try to
got?
make us stronger. Let's get stronger. No, I never say that anymore. Like, Oh,
I
things
learned a
couldn't
long
get
time
worse.
ago, never pray for patience.
No, no, no. So I I I do feel fairly comfortable with what I've been through and our family's experiences, that I've learned a lot. I'm a person of faith, and that that faith in loving God has really helped me, and to listen to spiritual promptings. I feel like I've learned that a lot, to trust those feelings, to trust that I can get inspiration as to what I need to do, or sometimes just for comfort, that everything will be okay. It doesn't seem okay right now, but in the big picture, it's going to be all right. So
I'm
that's
glad
been
you
a real strength.
I'm glad you brought that up because obviously, us both being raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints and having an upbringing that is very much religious and probably a big part of how we identify ourselves. Um, I've had to learn over the years that when maybe it's not in relation to mental health, but when I hear that what we call the still small voice, we believe is the Holy Ghost speaking to us. Um, those promptings, I have learned sometimes I go, that's ridiculous. Why would the Lord talk to me that way or tell me to go do that thing? And then I've learned it's because he knows who I am and he's talking to me, not generically, that here's the only way I communicate with people. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that more of us probably need to trust that when we hear that still small voice inside, that you know what? Don't doubt. Believe in that and believe that the Lord is looking out for you.
Yeah, yeah. I have a stronger sense of faith than ever. I know some people, when bad things happen, it really shakes their faith, and I don't judge them, but my own experiences, I've stronger faith that, and I feel like I'm more in tune with those feelings of inspiration in the spirit, and I seek those experiences,
That's awesome.
and I know that I can't do it on my own.
But by the same token, the way you're going to hear that inspiration is likely going to be different, at least in some ways, than me. Maybe overall, it's still kind of this voice or this feeling, but unique things that sometimes I've found. If the Lord wanted me to go here and do something, sometimes He'll go, "Hey, you might see this thing," and I think that's ridiculous. Why would I want to go see? Hey, you know what? I would like to go see that thing. And I'm being generic with it to avoid getting just very specifics, but I have a definite belief that your experience is unique to you as mine is to me.
And can I share one experience of inspiration that's really
Please.
helped? So when we were going through a really tough time as a family, and I prayed and told the Lord one thing, like, tell me one thing that I need to do, because I cannot do everything. Like, what's the one thing I need to do to make my life better? Um, and the answer was make dinner. And okay,
Right. That doesn't
did
make
I
any
hear that?
sense, right? Yeah.
Not spend hours reading the scriptures or worshiping more in the temple, or all these other things, like make dinner. Okay, all right. I said one thing and I would do it. And so I really put my emphasis on making dinner. And I love cooking, but I think at that time I wasn't loving it so much, when you're just in survival mode. And so my emphasis was on making dinner and making sure my family sat around the table and ate dinner. And sometimes it was not a happy, wonderful thing. You've got 6 kids that are not always thrilled to be eating dinner at the table. But, you know, I felt really blessed that that was a family time that we needed. That the emphasis for me on, like, okay, the most important thing I'm going to do today is make dinner and feed my family around a table. And it became a way to feed us spiritually as well as nutritionally, and have time together and to make it through hard stuff. And it's still one of the most important things I do every day. And so that's just an example of how I feel like I got an answer that was meant for me and really helped me a lot.
I think that's the perfect encapsulation of what we're talking about. That may not have made any sense to me, but I've had literal things where I see someone from a distance, think, "Hey, I want to know who that is." Well, no, maybe I want. And had I actually, and I went the other way, and then later I found out that that was someone who actually had meant to call me that day, but thought it's too late. I'm not, and I missed out on a really, really cool opportunity for another time. But that was one of those ones that made me go, "Hang on, that seemed like a
Yeah.
strange prompting, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe he's talking to me where I'm at, and he's going to meet me where I am, and that's okay. They're not all going to be thunderbolts and lightning, and I'm not going to have the Ten Commandments engraved on tablets for me or something. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you know, well, so uh, I don't know if you've already kind of touched on this, but one of the little questions I'd asked you to think about was how do you cope with stress?
So, um, one of the things is that, you know, stress. Oh, well, when I was a student at BYU, probably one of the most pivotal experiences I had there wasn't a class I took, it was a job I had. And I worked at the stress management and biofeedback lab. And so here I was, um, sophomore or junior in college, and got to work uh, and learn about stress management and helping people learn to deep breathe and mindfulness and guided imagery. Now, all that stuff is far more common now than it was then. That was more cutting edge, and using actually biofeedback to have you could see the difference it was making people. So just bring that up because I feel like I learned those skills, and that's something I have taught classes and taught people in throughout my life. And it's really, really blessed me taking that job. Um, so I do those things, the prayer, the deep breathing, the mindfulness, the meditation, but also things like reading. I feel like I have the superpower. Not everybody has it. When I read, I am almost instantly transported someplace else. It is my magic carpet for sure. Um, so reading is part of my self-care, especially in the winter as it gets darker. I read twice as much in the winter as I do in the summer. And part of it is if I'm someplace I really want to be, like the beach, I don't want to read a book because that's going to take me someplace else. So, uh, and
So you
disclaimer, I do
right.
work in a school library. I love books. I love reading. I'll work that into any conversation.
While we're fully disclosing things, we should make clear a couple things. Number one, you live in Western New York, so the winters are pretty dark and harsh. A lot of snow, a lot of darkness, a lot of cold, a lot of indoor time. Number two, your oldest daughter went to college to be a librarian, and
Yes.
then the second oldest is also a librarian.
Yep. Yeah. So,
Eh, books are pretty big in your house.
yes. Oh, yeah. So that's part of my managing, but also with stress management and kind of tying back to what I learned from the mental health challenges is I just find it helpful to see the world as if everyone is doing their best. Maybe they're not, but that's not for me to judge. And it really helps me to just, okay, we're going to pretend they're doing their best right now. And for all intents and purposes, it may be their best. And that helps me manage my stress because so much of stress I feel like is expectations, and all negative emotions are the results of unmet expectation is my theory. And so managing expectations, one of those is my expectations of other people and of myself, but um, I can speak more to that if you want, but those are part of what I've learned and how I cope and how I see the world.
Well, I mean, go ahead if you feel like it's related here and how you want to manage expectations. Go ahead and give us a little feedback on what you're thinking.
Well, I, I think oftentimes when we do feel a negative emotion, we don't challenge it. We may say to ourselves or others, don't feel that, instead of asking, where's that coming from? Where if you're really angry with someone, what's the expectation that wasn't met? Or you're feeling a lot of guilt. What was the expectation that I didn't meet for myself? Or, frustration or disappointment. It all comes down to expectations. And so as a parent, I found I needed to manage those expectations, because sometimes you get frustrated with the child. And then if I actually verbalized, what did I expect of this 2 year old? Oh, I was expecting this 2 year old to do X, Y, and Z that were not actually age appropriate expectations. Or I was expecting to my husband to do something who may be going through his own, mental health crisis. Maybe that wasn't an accurate expectation. And so, um, for me, learning to manage expectations and sometimes journaling about it. Why am I so upset or frustrated? Oh, because I expected this and that didn't happen. And when you verbalize it, you can realize, wow, I expected this and that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't realistic. It helps me to let go of those expectations. I mean, I'm not as far as, Buddhist. I've heard, expectations are the root of a lot of misery. I have not let go of expectations for myself and others, but at least understanding and questioning them has helped me through a lot.
It's interesting. I remember years back, and I won't go into exactly the details of how it came about, but I was given some advice by a very wise person. He actually, years before, was the president of the mission that I served in. And so we kind of kept in touch over the years. And I'd kind of complained to him about something. It was a minor issue, but it was kind of an irritant to me. And he said that as long as you view something as an option, that as long as you view something as an option that is not, you will suffer. And I thought about that. And he says, for example, he says, if you're married and you view dating as an option, then you're going to suffer. Um, if you have small children and you're, imagining this carefree life, you're just going to suffer, right? And so, whatever you can pick anything you want. For me, it was just a matter of what time of day my church was. That's where it came up. I was like, well, I don't want to go at 2 o'clock. I want to go at like a 9 or 10. And he says, come on, like that's not an option right now. So if you view it as an option, then you're just going to be miserable. So it was one of those lessons I had to learn of whenever I think of managing expectations. I've been in sales for 20 years. And so to me, managing expectations is how I deal with the customers that I'm working with, the clients that I'm dealing with, letting them know this is going to take 2 weeks or this is going to take, 12 hours or whatever, and prepping that ahead of time, managing their expectations. I don't usually think of that as myself.
Yes.
So I like that you said manage expectations and you brought it back to you, internalizing your expectations.
Well, that's the only one I have any control over. And even then, I wonder sometimes, but
I remember when I've got only two children, but when my daughter was very young, we were coming home from the boardwalk in Ocean City, and we kept her out way too late. I think she was under 2 years old, right? She's very young, might have been as old as two. And as we're driving home, she is just going crazy. She's just ornery. She's fussy. Just everything is going wrong. And I'm getting very angry and irritated that she's behaving like this. And then it dawned on me, it's 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night and whatever. And it dawned on me, she didn't choose to be out at 10 o'clock at night. That was me. And if I just put her in bed at a normal time, so it from that point on, for the last 20 some years, I've realized when people get angry at little kids, especially, I'm like, what did you expect out of that kid?
exactly, exactly.
So I don't hold it against little kids when their parents keep them up past their bedtime. That's on mom and dad. Um, so here's a question I want to pose to you. It may be a two-parter, it may be a one-parter. I want you to define this. What brings you happiness and what brings you joy? And I say that because I don't know if you see those as synonyms and it's the same thing, or if you go, well, this is happiness and this is joy.
So for me, happiness is more that in the moment feeling, that I can't think of an example, but even like, you're eating something that tastes wonderful. I'm happy. I'm happy right now. This is meeting my expectations, exceeding my expectations. And joy is more long term, more sustainable. Um, and what brings me happiness or
Yeah,
joy?
what brings you happiness and what brings you joy?
The first thing that comes to mind, I mean, my family. Having my family together for a meal and games and laughing is hits both. I'm happy and I'm joyful because of this big picture. Um, Also, nature really brings me happiness in the moment, but this deep sense of joy and peace. I get out every day, no matter the weather, raining, snowing. I found that that's so good for my mental health to be outside. I literally hug trees on a regular basis. I feel like they hug me back. I love the ocean. I love any kind of water. All those things, and part of it is a spiritual connection. I feel connected to my creator and creations. Reading is a wonderful blessing for me, but I don't just read fluff. And so, because I feel very empathetic as I read a lot of hard stuff that is, um, I guess, brings me joy in a sense because I feel connected with other people on the planet and through history and their experiences. Um, Also, tying back into the mental health, I learned the lesson: you can be going through really hard things and still have a sense of joy and peace, and like even really terrible things. And that was something I feel like the spirit taught me is, uh, if you've ever loved someone who's going through something really hard, and there's an old saying that a mother's only as happy as her least happy child. That's very dangerous. um, Thought, like, okay, I love these people, and so everything they're feeling, I have to feel, and that's just not making for a healthy perspective and a healthy life. But to know that you can be empathetic to other people, you can be going through hard things and still have a sense of peace and joy, was really a revelation when I really got that I don't have to be miserable all the time to show empathy and love. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I was jotting down little things as you spoke, and you're talking about nature, and I wrote down two things. I wrote down hippie with a question mark and tree hugger. So I know that you literally hug trees. I mean, it's an expression, but I don't know that I've ever really seen anyone hug trees like you do. The number of pictures of you hugging a tree, it's always
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, you're the Lorax, or I don't know what you are without the mustache. But just for fun, do you define yourself as a hippie? I joke that you are, but is that
um,
something you define
no, I
yourself
live
as,
near
or how do you
Ithaca,
define
New
it?
York. No, I say I live near Ithaca, New York, and there are old hippies there. I'm very tame, but I would say I'm granola. I'm quite crunchy. I do forage. I That brings me great joy to be able to find plants in my yard or in nature in the woods, harvest things at the beach that I can eat. That makes me so happy. I do love drumming circles. Yes, there are a lot of things. I wear peasant blouses and um,
I'm
try to
surprised you're not
be
wearing
very
tie dye today.
environmental.
Actually,
I actually, if we'd done this last night, I was wearing tie dye. So,
yeah. So, anyway, that occurred to me. Hey, hang on. I wonder how she. Let's tell everybody how you define yourself. And using a term like forage, you mean it literally.
I go and I pick things out of the ground that I have studied wild edibles for 20 years, and each year I try to find a few more things that I can be confident on and collect and eat and sneak into my family's food because they're not always supportive. But
Mom, did you pick our dinner again?
yes, sometimes I get caught,
There's a dandelion in my soup. Yes. Yes, there's a lot of dandelions in your soup. So I find it funny because most people, when they say they forage, they go into the pantry and they're just looking
Oh,
for, I think they're digging through, oh, there's something in the drawer in the crisper, whatever. But so I just want to make clear here, she means it, guys.
yes, I
Yeah,
actually
yeah. Yeah,
enjoy
don't
that.
if you're tired of weeds in your yard, don't use pet or herbicides. Call Rachel.
Just eat them. Yes.
She will clean them up. Um, I hadn't put this down before, but you've talked a lot about reading and being transported. And do you have a top maybe two or three, or even a Mount Rushmore of books that life changing books or books that everyone has to read, and maybe not life changing, but maybe they make your Mount Rushmore because you're like everybody should read The Giving Tree, whatever it is.
One of my all-time favorites was one I read as a teenager, and I pick up often, is Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. It's one of those that stand the test of time. I can open it up almost any place and get something out of it. Um, love that. I love children's books. I Even if I didn't work in a school library, I would still read children's books. I have pretty extensive children's book collection, and I so go to the picture book section of your library and check it out. There's lots of good stuff there. um, yeah, I hesitate to books, because when I read a book, it's because I need it right then. I mean, there is a book, Yes or No: The Art of Decision Making, which
Oh,
is one that Chris and I read early in our marriage, and we have used a lot in our decision making. So I do recommend that one. It's kind of set in a story. And someone recently told me that I think a copy we had given them had really helped them make decisions. So that's one I can highly recommend. Um, yeah, there's just too many books, and the different times and different seasons, where I'll read a book, and you can't always just recommend books that, because they have to speak to you right then. And but children's books, don't underestimate them, and young adult literature, I find
you talked
those.
about how you read some heavy stuff, and I pretty much do almost exclusively audiobooks. Although I've got these bookshelves behind me filled with books I pretend I'm going to read. Um, and I've read a couple where I start them. In fact, I've got the Screw Tape Letters. I was just looking back because I'd pulled that out and I had started that, and I set it aside, and I need to get back into it. I gotta go find it over there because that's one that I've
It's not
never finished the book. I need to go and read it. So that's one
And
you.
audiobooks are not cheating. Like, I mean, I listen to audiobooks too. I listen um, a lot as well as reading physical copies. But I still, some teachers would be like, "Oh, you can't read an audiobook." No, audiobooks are reading. It uses a different part of your brain, but you get credit for that.
Thank you. Well, I do them a lot on my bike. I just realized that the book I have, I've got 8 days left on it, but I'll knock it out probably by the next 2 days. So some of them are popcorn, right? I mean, I like the Jack Reacher novels, and then I try to mix that in with something that's a little heavier, like 12 Years a Slave or something like that. Black Like Me. I've done a few of these that are some are tough reads. Some are tough reads. All right. Well, I have a couple of questions that I didn't give you ahead of time. Kind of looking for right off the top of your head type of answers. So the first one is, what is something that you've learned that you most want to pass on to others?
I think we've covered a lot of the things that I feel I've learned, that not judging others and to give people grace, um, and just, yeah, that about managing expectations when people are going into a marriage, especially. I If anyone asks for opinions, that like that's manage your expectations and choose, what are your principles and what are your preferences, because your
Mm,
principles are things you're going to stick to, and your preferences are like, okay, this is what we can compromise on, and going into a relationship and being able to differentiate those two, because they're not all principles. I will tell you there, there are things, but the things that are super important to you that you don't go on. So that's advice I
yeah.
would give.
Okay. Decide which hill you're willing to die on,
That's
and
right.
it better not be how to fold the towels or something. Let's make
That's
sure
right.
it's important.
Choose those battles.
Do you have any regrets? And I'm not asking you to disclose what they are. I mean, it's up to you how you want to handle that. But do you have any regrets? And what do you do about that?
So when I've experienced regrets, and one regret I have is that, like, I don't have more video of my kids growing up because I was too busy raising them. That I didn't maintain friendships always as well as I wish I had. But then I have to give myself the grace that I try to give others and say, I was really doing the best I could at the time, and so I I try to live without regret and make decisions based on what am I most least likely to regret, as part of my decision making. But I don't live there.
Well,
I
good.
don't live in.
I sometimes have a hard time getting past certain things, right? And some of them seem very trivial. I remember once talking to a friend and telling him that my biggest regret was not trying out for quarterback my senior year in high school. It's my biggest regret. And I told him this while I was in college. And just because I'd always wanted to try, and I wasn't gonna start anything senior year anyway. And in the preseason, we had both our starting and backup quarterback broke their collarbone, and even if I was third string, I probably would have started a couple of games. And I missed it because I just didn't take the chance. And so I remember telling him this, and then he said to me, Andy, if that's your biggest regret, you're doing okay. And I
That's right.
realized afterwards who I was talking to. This is a friend from high school who had fallen asleep at the wheel, and his car crashed into an oncoming car and killed someone.
Oh,
And I
gee.
had, and I'm like, all right, Andy, read the room,
Yeah.
okay, probably not a big, maybe stop living in that regret. So, anywho, some people have worse regrets.
Yeah.
Give them grace. Um, what is one bucket list item that you will accomplish?
As you know, our family's in the process right now of certifying to be foster parents. And, um, that's something we've always talked about doing. Um, and we're close. Hopefully, in the next couple of months, we'll be able to be open and be able to have kids here who need a home. So I'm excited that that's close.
Wow. I, I don't think very many people have fostering children as their bucket list. You have a huge heart, Rachel. I mean, that's amazing.
I
That's
feel like
awesome.
I've learned a lot, and here I got all the, I've learned so much in my experience. Like, okay, now I feel
That,
obligated and I love kids. That's the other thing that brings me happiness and why I work in a school is I love kids. I love being around kids. So
well, that is hopefully that resets it. Maybe a few of us will rethink some of our bucket list items and go, maybe find a selfless one in there too. And
no
the
doubt.
last one is, how do you want to be remembered as a person, and what's something you've accomplished you'd like to be remembered for?
As a person, I was thinking about this the other day, like what I would hope people would say at my funeral or that kind of thing. And like that that I loved, that I was a loving person in their life, that I gave them grace, and I, that's what I hope to be known for, is that I love people. Um, and something that I've done, there was something on my bucket list before, was that I always wanted to have a story arts festival with, storytellers and puppets and authors. And before COVID, I co-chaired a story arts festival in our town of Homer, with a good friend, Priscilla, and haven't revisited that again. But even if I didn't ever get it going again, I was like, that was something on my bucket list that I was really glad to have done. But it just feels like it pales in comparison to loving children, my own children, and hoping to foster. And
Well, there's nothing wrong with being proud of that. That's fun. That's a thing that that literally may have made the difference in someone's life. You don't underestimate. You talk about how important it is to read and books and the transport, and here you set up this entire festival. Uh, who knows which kid that may have lit the fire in, or some parent or some adult who says, you know what, I do get a lot out of reading. Well, let's do this book festival.
yeah, so that was, I was very proud of that.
It's funny because when you move to New York, most people I think hear New York and they're assuming the city, but you've never lived anywhere near New York
Nope,
City.
nope, we're upstate, central New York.
Yeah, Utica, Cortland, and Homer, and I hadn't been up to Homer forever, and you would always talk about the Center for the Arts being right down the street and how your kids can walk there, and the library, and this like quaint little village. It's a
Village.
literal village,
Is our village.
literally class size village. And so once I got up there and got to see this and see, how close it was and how quaint the place was and the river nearby and all this great stuff, I really enjoyed walking around your village and checking it all out. And I could see why you'd fall in love with that.
It is a great place. Yeah, the bench I'm sitting on was an old pew from Center for the Arts back when it was a Baptist church that we have in our dining room.
Well, that's awesome. Well, is there anything we haven't discussed that you'd like to cover or touch on, or any message you'd like to share that we haven't gotten to?
Um, oh, I feel like if this is how people knew me, I would be grateful that you've preserved this little bit of who I am. So I appreciate that. And I just want to shout out to you how much I appreciate that you are someone who really looks for diverse voices. Like, I really appreciate that you don't live in an echo chamber, and that you keep friends, you don't choose your friends by only those that agree with you or the same faith or politics or whatever. And I just really appreciate that about you, and doing this podcast and your other podcast. And the discussions you get going on Facebook. I just want to let you know, if I haven't said it before, that I really do admire that about you, and I am really proud to call you my brother.
Wow, I did not know that. Um, that means a lot. I've always tried to keep a diverse group of friends, and I feel like there's something to learn from someone, even if you disagree with them. Today's political climate has become very tribal, very much here or I'm here, and if I'm here and you're not, you're bad, you're evil, and there's no good I can take from you. And I've seen that affect relationships and families and friendships, and the past 8 to 10 years have been pretty rough for some people. And while there may be people online who would say, I've been called a few different things. Some people on the right call me, whatever. I'm a commie socialist, and people on the left think I'm too far right, and or I'm a, whatever. Anyway, there's a lot of you're just a troublemaker, whatever. And that's not my intent. So I
No.
I definitely appreciate that, and I've always wanted to do something like this. I've always wanted to have a place where I can bring interesting people out and we can talk and hear their stories. I am considering doing a political based podcast where I literally try and bring in well read and interesting people from the right side of the spectrum and the left side and kind of moderate a discussion between the two of them. No personal attacks, no nothing like that. So, um, you know, I'm trying to see if I think that's viable and if I've got people willing to do it and people who can do it civilly. I guess we'll find out. But I'll try to keep them separate. This is the inspirational podcast here. This is the Everyday Rockstars.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any question you want me to answer? Any final thoughts here? Any final things that maybe you've always wanted to get on record?
Well, no, that's what I wanted to share. I was hoping to get a chance to let you know how much that people are watching and that I admire that about you.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for being so open, intimate, and vulnerable.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
The only last thing to say, Rachel, is Rachel Hyde, you are an everyday rock star. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Please share with your friends, like, and subscribe.